The deathcore of Krieg, everybody. Fair to say, a reveal that maybe not I, but Phil has a great deal more of an opinion on. So yeah, we may as well get into it. So first hot take, Phil. What's the vibe?
It's mixed. It's mixed. I've had people flooding my inbox wanting to know what my hot take is. Some of it's good, some of it's not good. I'm trying to. Overall, I'm quite positive. I think more so than when we first saw the plastic kill team ones. I think I was highly critical of those sculpts, and I still am. There's still things wrong with those. And the things that are wrong with those, they've sort of carried on into this range, and I was hoping they wouldn't. But obviously, they want them to be a bit more unified. Maybe they're not wrong anymore, Phil. Maybe this is just a new normal. Maybe you're wrong. Well, unfortunately, I think that's the case. I am a diehard Forge World resin Krieg player. I've been collecting them since I got back into the hobby, which was like 2012, around then. So over 10 years now, let's say. Been really into them, like my first new love, being back into the hobby. And then it was a slow rounds of disappointment as sort of support for the army in terms of rules disappeared, but also then models and units started disappearing from the Forge World shop. And, I occasionally dust them off to play, but I haven't been as active a Krieg player is, probably other people right now, because I've sort of moved on to other projects and other armies like my Thunder Warriors, my Minotaurs. In a way, being slightly more distanced from them, I can take this change easier, I think, than if I was still trying to, be a super active Krieg player like I would have been, say, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's fair to say I always felt like the betrayal of 9th edition was kind of one of those massive moments for the whole kind of Krieg community, and by which I essentially just mean you, because essentially I look at you wherever, in my understanding of the Krieg community, wherever you reside, that is basically the population of the Krieg community. But I mean, basically, obviously I appreciate there's lots of fans of Krieg. I'm not meaning to sound sort of flippant, but yeah, I think that's the thing. Like the way that I saw you and by extension other Krieg fans manage your disappointment during the 9th edition release and the complete kind of gutting of the faction, it's definitely fair to say that I understand why over time, over the last like 4 or 5 years since that, what was it even called? It was like a Forge World Imperial Armor Compendium, wasn't it, or something? They released them in 9th edition.
It was the Forge World Compendium.
Yeah, where they gave you the ability to shoot on death or something. That was essentially all you got.
Oh, yeah. So that was, the sort of detachment rules was, I think you could, shoot on death when you died. I think you still had to roll, and it was extremely bad if you were a vehicle because you were shooting on your lowest profile out of the 3 that you had back then. It wasn't great for that one.
And also, it was kind of the beginnings of lots of stuff getting taken away from you. So you lost like Grenadiers, you lost the what was it called now? The big transport.
The Gorgon. It disappeared initially. It wasn't in the book. Then because at the time it wasn't on the web store, I guess, when it was being printed. But by the time the book came out, it was back on the web store because it was at a time when Forge World units, basically, if the silicone molds break, they sort of take them off the store. They eventually have to redo the masters for the molds, and eventually they put it back into production. So by the time the compendium was actually out, the Gorgon was back on sale. So then they eventually updated the PDF to include it. But a bunch of stuff was wrong, like transport capacity was wrong. And I think I don't know, I haven't checked recently, but for a long time, basically, they updated it with a slightly better transport capacity. I think it went from like 30 to 40. It's meant to be 50. And it was always funny that you would look on the website for where they were selling the Gorgon, and the description literally says it transports 50 models or 50 infantry. But the rules say it was like 30 or 40. So they did a few like stuff updates for that, and they still hadn't ever got it quite right, which was a bit disappointing for a lot of players, especially as it had just come back out and was now purchasable, but then for a bit it didn't actually have rules at all. So yeah, it's been a rough experience sort of from 8th onwards as a Krieg player. And weirdly, in hindsight, I felt like 8th actually was quite good support, although it always felt like we could have done with more. But everything, all the model range, I believe, maybe with the exception of the twin-linked heavy stubbers, was there, I think. And, it wasn't 100%, but it was way better than it got in 9th. And then, subsequently in 10th, where, lots of stuff has disappeared or, moved over to Legends and things like that.
Yeah, I think like 8th, because they did a really good job of like synergizing it with the actual core book and allowing you to essentially add your specialisms on top, but also sort of access other things through the way that the detachment systems worked back then. Yeah, the 8th edition rule set seemed far better suited to realizing the idea of the Krieg. But again, like the 8th edition Imperial Armor index that the Krieg were in 8th edition was a product of Forge World design, right? Even if it was, as I understand it, a very rushed job, it was still kind of much more of a love and expression of the rules as kind of dictated by the original kind of creators, concept designers of the range, or people that maybe had just a bit of a more intimate understanding of what they were historically. It definitely feels more and more now that Games Workshop are obviously attracted to the fact that Krieg are this very popular and very cool guard regiment. But it does feel like often, especially with Games Workshop's current kind of design or release kind of methodology of essentially a design studio that makes miniatures in isolation of lore, rules, and any other kind of supporting elements, and effectively just releasing stuff that designers think is cool, and allowing then the writers and designers, the rules team, to essentially fill in the blanks. And it feels very much with this range to me that not a huge amount of attention has necessarily been given to the past and the kind of heritage of the range, but they are kind of sort of, or rather not necessarily the range. I think it's very kind of authentically Krieg in terms of some of the design aesthetics, but it's not very authentically Krieg in terms of some of the actual kind of loadout decisions or over kind of elements, I suppose. It basically feels like a bunch of really amazing sculptors were given, Forge World minis and were told to update it, but not really at any point thinking about, I don't know, maybe it's just like the change in overall mood or tone. It's something about it does feel, it looks like Krieg, but it's like there's something, it almost doesn't have like the essence of it somehow, it just feels, it's like an uncanny valley thing. I'm looking at Krieg, but something's off is the way I would kind of say I sort of see it. But maybe that's just me kind of, seeing a particular perspective on the range based on someone like yourself who has such a very particular kind of appreciation for what they were historically, dare I say. Oh, you've gone mute, Phil. Sorry, but that had some weird technical difficulties. But yeah, Phil, as I was saying, because I listened to you talk about it a bunch, I basically look at these Krieg and I kind of, as I say, get like an uncanny valley effect. It's like, they are Krieg, but are they really?
No, you're completely right. It's the I can't believe it's not butter effect.
Ooh.
But it's I can't believe it's not Krieg. It's slightly Krieg, but it's not authentically Krieg. And I think some of the issues I have is they have sort of retconned potentially some of the lore, or at least definitely the design aesthetics of them ever so slightly. I think if you squint, most people will just be like, well, they look like Krieg, but they're not. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we go through the article and look at these models.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, with that being said, we may as well get into the article and look at the models. So, essentially, the first thing out of the block is the Death Krieg, or Core Krieg, sorry, getting that wrong already. Apparently the P and the S are silent, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's Def Core, but if you say Def Corps of Krieg, I think that's technically wrong. So it's Def Core of Krieg.
Well, I trust you as the Krieg authority. Anyway, we kick off with a fancy new box set that contains a heck of a lot of Death Riders, some of the new infantry that we'll get into, all the miniatures we'll kind of talk about individually, as well as a heavy weapon emplacement and character upon a horse as well. So it looks like a pretty good selection of miniatures if you're looking to get into Krieg. This feels like a pretty good jumping off point. You also got the limited edition codex in there, as well as it seems some data cards to go with them also. So what's your vibe, Phil? Are you digging this box? You're thinking that maybe this one day will be yours?
I sort of feel like I am a Forge World through and through Krieg player. So I don't think I can necessarily have an army that marries both the plastic range and the resin range. I think at most I will probably take elements and convert them, or use weapons and maybe the odd character potentially in with my army, but I'm not going to be buying this box just to get a whole new load of plastic Death Riders. It's like I already have, I've got 10 built, and I've probably in my box of stuff got at least another 10, if not 15 Death Riders that I will be using instead. So, but however, I'll acknowledge that this box set is great if you're a new player or guard player that just want to expand your range away from Cadia. I think this is a really interesting potential look into the future of what we might get with Guard, because the way I see this is probably the second wave of Guard releases from the Cadia launch that we had previously. Personally, I'd love it if this is what we see going forwards, and maybe in a year or two's time we get a box like this that's Katachan or Talon or something like that. And I would love them to go back to the days of old where Guard was made up of lots of multiple different regiments. So I think from that perspective, I think it's really good. I think value-wise, it's probably going to be pretty good. I think the character's pretty cool. The artillery piece is interesting. And Death Riders are probably the most iconic units as within the Krieg, even though they're very similar to the now relaunched Rough Riders. So that's an interesting sort of thing, but it also gives lots of conversion potential. So, for example, if you want loads of horses, for you're a Acadian player, for example, you've got your Attilian Rough Riders, but then you could also use the rules for these, but convert them up as your more Attilian Rough Riders, for example, or vice versa now.
Or you could use both,
or just use them both and you acknowledge that they're sort of separate regiments. But I know some people like to lean into it, and maybe some people would be using the Rough Riders as Death Riders or vice versa, for example. So I can see that happening more so even now.
I'd say do it all, mate. Build that incredible cavalry guard army with the Rough Riders spearheading at the front, and then all these Death Riders, bringing up the rear with their more kind of defensive and or kind of more rounded kind of profiles, I suppose. Although, again, who knows for sure what these are going to be. I'm still basing that off what Death Riders were, to be honest with you, most of the way through 9th edition, where they were essentially the tankiest horses in the world.
Yeah, they were back then. They've always struggled to have a bit of punch to them. Maybe that will change this time round. But who knows?
We'll see. What do you reckon of the special edition cover? It's a classic piece of artwork. Weirdly framed, I thought. I like the artwork itself, but I'm not sure if it's... I don't know, the way they've cropped it makes it feel quite vacant. It's sort of it's a weird look.
Yeah, I mean, if you scroll down to where it is, because there's like a standalone image of it, and we can talk about it now. It's interesting.
Oh, there it is.
It's the classic Siege of Rax image. It's like a landscape image, and in the background you see lines of troops marching along, which is really interesting. But my one real gripe with this, because it is obviously a stunning piece of artwork, my one gripe is that they have featured within it is a combat engineer who no longer looks like this whatsoever. So they featured something on this cover that doesn't exist anymore, and
to
they
be fair,
completely redesigned it to not look like this.
They've just done the exact same thing with the Blood Angels, though. So the Blood Angels special edition book that you get in the Def Company box set features Sanguinary Guard that don't look anything like Sanguinary Guard anymore.
Yeah, and they obviously did something similar with the Inquisition book, where they redid.
Oh, they've got Inquisitor. The Inquisitor, which don't look like that no more.
Effectively, yeah. Not Hector, because Hector Rex is the Forge World one. Oh God, it's going to bug me.
Cotiers,
that's it. Yeah, I was going to say Jobber for a second.
Jobber, yeah.
But yeah, Cotiers doesn't look as good as the artwork, and they've sort of drastically redesigned him. And unfortunately, as we'll see shortly, the Combat Engineer falls into that category as well, which is just really disappointing, unfortunately. But yeah, it is a great piece of artwork, but yeah, sadly it's somewhat cropped, but yeah, what can you do about that? And as we'll see later, I actually really like the standalone Guard Codex. And again, that's something to think about with this is, yes, this is all, Krieg themed, but this is, just a box set of Guardsmen. You can play these guys. You don't just need to have a Krieg army, for example. You can have a generic Astra Militarum army to buy this box. Similar with Cadians, although Cadians are normally the de facto regiments that you see. And obviously the standalone codex, again, themed Krieg, which is great. But inside that and inside the box with all the data sheets is going to be all the Astra Militarum stuff, not just the Krieg stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you can see now the new Astra Militarum Codex cover. Definitely one of the strongest Codex covers that they've done for new 40k. I really like it, actually, which is a rare statement when it comes to new 40k Codex covers. But this one, I think, actually does a really good job. I like the dynamic kind of posing of the characters, the way that the whole kind of composition of the piece works. I think it's just a very good image. Plus, again, obviously, really good depiction of kind of Kriegsman, which is always cool to see. So yeah, genuinely really like that cover. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's strong. I actually really like it. It's got some sort of great backlighting to the models, or to the infantry in it. So yeah, it looks really nice. And yeah, personally, I actually prefer that to the special edition one.
Well, all that being said, let's have a look and talk about the miniatures. So the first of the miniatures is, what is the name of this?
Varman Dreer, who's Lord Marshal. So he's not just a Field Marshal, which is the sort of generic rank for sort of an officer, who we don't see at all in this range, but instead we've got the Lord Marshal, who's a character on horseback, which we haven't really ever had before. I think there have been, weirdly, there's always been rules, I think I don't think we necessarily had it in 8th. Yeah, I think maybe we did have it in 8th, because you had, definitely had it in 9th, where you had an officer on horseback, by that I mean Death Riders, and a command squad of Death Riders, and the Death Riders command squad allowed them all to outflank together off the table edge, which was really interesting and sort of narratively fun, but there was never a model for this, so I just used one of my own sort of models converted up, or as there used to be a Commissar on Death Rider, which was an event exclusive miniature that you could get back, I think it was like 2008, so quite a long time ago. So yeah, there was never a Lord Marshal model, although weirdly at some point they introduced rules for him, but that never existed in, say, 6th and 7th edition, and when the Siege of Rex or Fall of Orpheus, which is the other famous Imperial armor book that featured Krieg, but obviously Siege of Rex is the one that gets all the love and attention. So yeah, it was interesting that it was a sort of like a new invention from the Games Workshop team, let's say, for a character. But I think loads of people had always converted models up to sort of represent this type person. So yeah, from that perspective, it's great to see it finally represented in the flesh.
Yeah, indeed. I suppose, given the rank of, Lord, this guy will obviously sit below Lord Solar in that sense. So he's not a High Lord of Terror or equivalent, but clearly quite high ranked. The miniature, in terms of the base size, looks like it sits on a slightly smaller base. It is sort of ovaled as opposed to the Solar's, larger dreadnought sort of sized base that it stands on. And by dreadnought, I mean the old Spudnauts, not the modern day Redemptor. That's a crazy size base. But so again, clearly a character with a good level of stature. And again, interesting to see, an officer, coming in on horseback. The commissar and, the kind of command squad, I suppose, made sense in and of itself. And I suppose it does make sense anyway for a lord to be riding around on top of one of these mounts. So, yeah, I mean, personally for me, not as like a super diehard Krieg fan like yourself, I think the mini's really strong. I think it's got a lot of really amazing elements. It definitely has a lot of extra ornamentation to really kind of get home the point that this is a very senior, important character. And that kind of visual communication is going to work well across the tabletop. But sometimes in photography, it can start to look a little bit busy. I, for one, will probably be looking to, should I ever get around to doing one of these, looking to kind of carve off things like the weird like hose pipe that's going into the horse's neck. That's a bit of a sort of weird extra embellishment that I'm like, that could probably go away. I'm always looking to clip things off to make my painting life easier. But on the whole, I think the base details are really nice. Yeah, I think it's a really solid mini. I can't really fault it overall.
Yeah, there's some good elements to it. There's some bits that have obviously changed from the previous sort of Death Rider aesthetic. And also the sort of the field marshal aesthetic as well. One of them's the gas masks, and this is a theme that's going to be reoccurring because it will happen with the new combat engineers as well. So commanders, or the field marshal before, basically just had a gas mask that went down to his front, and it wasn't attached to any kind of box like a standard infantryman. It just had a sort of extra units on the side, and that's how it worked. And then I think actually there was a filter unit on his back as well. Things like the engineers and grenadiers had a similar thing, and the pipe went from the unit on the back to round to the front. Which was much more elegant and interesting than, just infantry with the gas mask hose going down to the front. And it was a great way of signifying the difference between sort of the elite.
A bit more ornate, a little bit. Yeah, a bit more high profile. I've got a bit of a better respirator.
A bit more streamlined, allows for more maneuverability, things like that. You could see there being some sort of thought behind it. Whereas now they've just done the sort of front box for everything, which to me just feels a bit cheap. And it feels like the distinction between sort of the ranks getting slightly better equipment worked better in the older Forge World range. And similar, I think the horse had a similar thing where it didn't have a hose going sort of halfway up its neck. But I can't remember exactly. Maybe if you can do some editing wizardry, you could put in some older images to compare down for the video. That would be great. So we can actually, show people what it did look like. And then again, a similar thing was the horse's hooves have definitely changed from the Death Riders of old. Whereas to me, it felt more like they had more of like a split hoof. Rather than what they now have, which is like these weird claws. There was always like an extra sort of gangly claw on the side, which you can still see on here. But yeah, they've definitely gone away from what felt like the original design of the hooves, to be more like claw hands. And, some people think that's what they were before, but maybe their hands were just, neatly held together because they were sort of like this with that little claw bit.
Like a geisha's foot.
Yeah, I guess so. It's sort of, whereas now it's just like, free taloned like claws. Definitely distinctly different than what it was before. So that bugs me a little bit. But otherwise there's some really cool...
It is different, but I don't dislike it necessarily. I do understand that it is much less subtle.
Yes.
Like at a glance before the Death Rider, it was like one of those sort of things you didn't notice until it was pointed out to you by someone who'd obviously painted a bunch of you. Be like, oh yeah, wow, I didn't notice that. Whereas
the way I always described them as they always felt more like camel feet as opposed to horses. And that was like the subtle difference in them, because obviously these are genetically engineered beasts. So they're not horses. And the one thing that always bugged me about Lord Solar was that it was a horse. And in my mind, horses shouldn't really exist in 40k. They shouldn't even really have much of a concept of what a horse looks like, because the time difference is so much. Horses would not be horses. That was one of the things about the Onager Dune Crawler, because Onager, I think, means mule, and it's like, because this is what they thought mules look like, with their 4 legs walking around, and because there's so much lost.
Well, that was
history.
Mars specifically, mate.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Mars have some very interesting ideas about how things work, mate. I think conceptually, I can imagine that horses will have, for whatever reason, been taken out across the great, expanse of the universe of 40K.
And just never evolved for that time. Or maybe they've not needed to.
Well, apparently the humans don't in this. Well, some of them
true.
become psychers, I suppose, which I guess is like some of the evolutionary elements, I guess.
But ultimately, it's still the same. Yeah, so overall, I don't mind the fact that they've made the slight change, and the fact that they've sort of justified it with its kind of more maneuverability for the sort of uneven surfaces that it's kind of clambering over in terms of the trench warfare. So that all makes sense. That's all fine.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. I'm okay with that. But again, I understand it's a lot less subtle.
Yeah.
But maybe it needed to be to really drive the point home and
sort of differentiate it more so from the sort of the Rough Riders, right? So yeah, I get that. And overall, the rest of it's pretty cool. Like he's got some really interesting bits to it. So he's obviously got a plume on his head. He's got sort of slightly more ornate armor on the horse, on the chest. The basing, I think, is incredibly good. I like the mixture of the skulls and the sort of the trench pieces and the barbed wire. I think that's all very good. And the kind of classic minefield sign, that's all fantastic. The branding that you get on the horse is now like embossed onto the model itself, because before it used to be a transfer that you could apply on, whereas now it's just sculpted into the model. I like that there's different sort of weapon options and poses, like the version where he's like sort of pointing with the sword. I really like that one, I think, the most. So those aspects are very cool. I mean, if they had done a version with the binoculars, which is sort of similar, like a nod to the old Commissar model, because he had a las pistol, or I think it was like las pistol, bolt pistol. Did he have a bolt pistol? It was basically las pistol and binoculars with two sort of hand options that he had, I think. So if they had a binoculars one in there as a nod to that old model, that would have been cool. But not essential at all. So I'm not quibbling with that. But overall, I like the model on the whole, despite the aesthetic changes that they have made. And obviously, the things that I didn't like about the old veteran guardsman from Kill Team, the things that bugged me the most was the metal bar along the gas mask, and the slight change to the shoulder pads as well, where
that's all prevalent here, right?
And then those things are carried over, but enough time has passed that
you've healed.
Here's the thing: it still bothers me, but I just care less about it as something that bothers me. But
they've updated their gear, mate. That's all it is. You see, they got a new uniform sent in the post.
Well, I guess so. Yeah, there's some. I think the shoulder pad design sort of mirrors the Cadian ones a little bit more. So I was thinking, if they're doing some sort of arm swaps and stuff, maybe it would be fine in terms of that respect, and it sort of ties in a bit better. I think with this model, what I would do is I would kit bash my own, because I've had in my head an idea of doing a sort of Lord model on horseback for literally like 5+ years, and it would be more along the lines of the Lord Solar pose, because that's obviously based on the famous Napoleon image where the horse is sort of rearing upwards and he's sort of waving his sword in the air. That's the sort of thing I would do for this model. So I've had that sort of concept in my head for years, and now it's obviously going to have some cool rules for it. Well, fingers crossed it'll be cool, but it's going to have rules for it. So that will, prompt me to go back to my Krieg and, maybe do some new stuff for it. And I think ultimately that's what most of this range does represent. If I'm giving the summary somewhat ahead of schedule, that's the greatest thing out of this, because the plastic to me doesn't really mean much, because I already own most of these models or equivalents of And it's just then sort of updating my model range to fit the new rules is the main thing.
That's fair.
But yeah, it's a cool model, basically.
Yeah, long story short, it's cool. And then we get into the Death Riders themselves, a few different alternates here. They're all coming now with swords, which is an interesting change, I believe.
They've always had swords on them, but they've always been sheathed, unless you did a conversion like I did with one of mine. But they all come with lances by default, and then to their sides is a sword.
Oh, I didn't realise that. I thought the sword was a new addition. But okay, cool. Well, that's good then. If they were always sworded up. I was trying to work out, by the way, what this random base is here. Do you ever see this in the actual article? Like, what's that random base doing?
I think that's a Photoshop mistake. And they've not.
I think that's a Photoshop mistake too.
That's so funny because it's a plain unpainted base, which makes you think that's there for scale, maybe for some comparison. Maybe. So it's probably in like some master Photoshop file, and it's just a layer that they forgot to switch off. And because they've put on the reveals Warhammer logo on top, it's sort of somewhat been hidden. Because I haven't noticed that until you pointed it out.
That's fair. I mean, it doesn't appear, unless I'm mad. Yeah, it didn't appear in any of the other images. Just that one there. But anyway, look. I mean, a lot of what we've said already applies to this in terms of the changes to the mounts. I love the dynamic posing of the miniatures. I think there's a lot of really good stuff to love about them. This guy in particular, the one in the top right with the spear facing downwards.
He's my favourite.
So cool. Yeah. Just so much sort of dynamism and just general kind of expressiveness in that miniature. It's really awesome. I love it. I think this kind of adaptation is really cool to see. I mean, this fella in front of him with the sword pointed out and the horse a bit more in a stride, shall we say, looks a little bit unstable.
The horse is like, it's a bit odd.
He's doing the old funny walk from Monty Python, isn't he?
Yeah, that one's the only one where the horse looks slightly odd, and obviously the very first one, the horse is doing the rearing up thing that I said I would do for my commander, but the fact that the claws are like really sort of splayed out that makes it look odd to me. And actually, to credit to this, I actually really like the horse poses. I think they are really dynamic and interesting, and that's the one big criticism if you were having lots of the Death Riders from the old Forge World range.
They're very static.
They're just sort of stood there and then not very dynamic. So to see them sort of having this breath of life thrown into them is really positive and very cool. And also I think the horses look so much more realistic here than the Attilan Rough Riders, where the poses just seemed a bit dead. And I don't know if that's because they were sort of mostly covered by loads of like flowing robes. And here you can actually see the legs a bit more. And, these look really good. And they feel more like Death Riders to me.
Totally.
So, I like these. These are good.
No, I think they're great. How do you feel about the fact you're going to have to rebase your Death Riders, though? If you're
I'm not, is the answer.
It's just going to be like, there you go.
Yeah.
I care not for your ovals. I'm going to stick on my circles.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just a historical thing because mine were on rounds, but overall, I much prefer round bases to ovals. If everything was on rounds, even if it was slightly chunkier and there was a bit more dead space on the base, I would prefer that visually. I think I've always just preferred rounds to ovals. It's a lot to rebase. Admittedly, I've only got 10, so actually it's maybe not that much, but then there's other things like artillery and stuff that maybe need rebasing. But yeah, personally, I'd rather keep mine on the rounds. And is someone really gonna, it depends if I'm going to take these to events and things like that. In which case,
not really.
if I was, then maybe I would. Yeah, the fact that they've changed it bugs me a little bit, but it's in keeping with the, the Attilan Rough Riders. So, I can't complain too much, and that's just the norm nowadays that stuff has to be rebased.
Worst case scenario, you could just get like a bit of cardboard, cut it out, put them on top of that, and just be like, yeah, there you go. If you really care, here's a marker for what the
ultimately,
it would look terrible the tabletop, but at least it would make it game legal.
Yeah, I assume the circle is slightly smaller than the sort of the length of the oval, but wider than the width. So it's sort of like you lose a bit, but then you gain a bit elsewhere. So ultimately, to me, it's like it's the same thing. Like, you know, if you want me to bunch my circles up all together and say that's the ovals with like maybe an inch between them for coherency, and that that's how you want me to play it, fine. Like, but ultimately, you know, when you're starting on a line and you're moving forwards, the distance is going to be the same whether it's an oval or circle. It's only if you were pivoting, for example.
The old pivot. They're not big enough to be impacted by the pivot, though, are they?
No, they wouldn't be. But it should be. I don't think they are. No.
Who knows?
Actually, no, anyway, they probably will be, because my jet bikes have to pivot, and I think they have similar bases. So, yeah.
Oh, well. But Dev Rider Mini is super cool. Next along, we have the Combat Engineers, which is, something that was there before, but now made new, right?
Yes and no. So this is the biggest gripe that I have with this range. So combat engineers have always existed. They have not looked like this. This is a grenadier squad, which was a separate unit. They had the iconic skull masks, which is the design that we see here. There was one of them available, weirdly, in the veteran guardsman kit, as like a sort of upgrade or specialist weapon guy, could have that. So they were sort of teasing us as a concept. So this is a bit of an odd one where they've sort of called it one thing, given it the design of another thing, given us the weapon options as the first thing, and then also given us some new weapon options, which is interesting, which we can talk about. But yeah, ultimately, Grenadiers were the Kazakins or Scion equivalent. They had hotshot lasguns. They also, interestingly, had a heavy flamer team, which we get to in a minute when we get to those. But they also had specialist weapons. So they were sort of like your elite infantry, like Kazakins. And then the combat engineers, which came with the Hades drill, which was a very cool Forge World unit. They would sort of pop up and they would sort of be able to appear from the ground, basically. So here it's an interesting one. They've called them combat engineers, but the visual aesthetics is very much in line with the Grenadiers, which who knows what that means from a lore perspective. This is probably, without, speculating, one of the biggest sort of retcons, to call it that, of Warhammer for a while. Or it's just sort of
all Warhammer.
Well, as a Forge World person, yes.
Fair.
But yeah, like I don't want to say it too much, because there might be some interesting lore or story in the books that goes into detail of explaining it. It feels like it's just a compromise where they've gone, but people really love the look of the Grenadiers, but we have rules and have been supporting rules for combat engineers. So we're just going to sort of mash them together. And ultimately, the worst case scenario is if you want Grenadiers, like the old school Grenadiers, you would take these models, you would kit bash them with some Kazakin or Scions for the hotshot lasguns, and you would run them just as Kazakins or Scions. So it's not a problem. There's still technically rules for them in a way, and you would just use their armor and then swap out the arms. And you've got your old models. And then if you've got combat engineers for the old ones from Forge World, you would just run them as this squad. So it's not really a problem for a lot of people, but I sort of hate that they're not two separate units. And I think, they've given Cadian players Kazakins. So it's like, why not give Guardsmen the equivalent Grenadier squad as a separate unit? Why sort of smush them together with the combat engineers?
I mean, again, I kind of get the vibe that, kind of similar to what we had said at the start, that they had basically come up with a concept from a design perspective, but not really taken the time to understand what was there before, and probably didn't really care too much.
Yeah.
Just went, here's your specialist unit. So it's like, cool, here's your normal unit, here's your specialist unit. Happy days. I was just looking at it as a point of comparison to see if the Kazakin sculpts would be eligible for some arm swapping potential. I'll just pop that in there just so as you can sort of see. So the two side by side, you can kind of see actually with the way that they've kind of rejigged the shoulder pads now, that potentially it's quite viable to do that kind of
yeah.
between the two.
It depends on if they've got like the sort of sleeves or not. On the Kazakin one, it would, if you were being nitpicky, that would be the thing to look out for. But then ultimately,
I mean, they don't have the sleeves, but I mean, at this point, like, I'm sure you wouldn't really worry too much. It just depends, I suppose, how compatible they might be. My assumption is not very.
No,
I could be wrong.
But it would be great if it was. It just say the vibe is that it feels like they don't really care about the history and look of the Forge World range from which the popularity of the Krieg has derived, and that they're just doing their own thing and not really caring, which sort of feels... Yeah, just a bit of a shame, really, that that's the direction they've gone, because they could have just done classic Deathcore combat engineers with the classic look where they've almost got like one big eye and sort of one regular one, and they've got a little light strip on their armor plates, because they do have the similar armor along the front, like they are sort of a bit more kitted out like the Grenadiers, but they don't have the skull masks and they don't have the kind of classic gas mask. It's sort of like a different look entirely. And they've got these cool like backpacks on instead, and they've got the combat shotguns. Like, that's all cool. And if they had done that in plastic, that would have been great, and I would have loved that. Yeah. And instead of this little weird sort of drill mole like remote control unit, they could have given us the Cyclops, which again is a classic, famous little remote controlled bomb unit, again made by Forge World. It was playable by all factions. It wasn't Krieg specific, but it was very like played into the kind of Krieg aesthetic, I guess, or the rules. So lots of people did play them. If you were a Krieg player, you probably had them, whereas only some people would bother getting them. You know, there were guard players of other regiments that would buy Forge World models, but definitely Krieg players always bought a lot of Forge World models. So yeah, like they could have just given us something that we wanted, instead give us something that we didn't really ask for that isn't as good as the originals. That is my overall takeaway with this unit. But the one thing that is cool is we finally gotten the thing I wanted for Krieg, which is a sort of trench combat unit that's just infantry. So here you've got your, I think it's las pistols. Well, actually, no, maybe it's auto pistols. And
it looks auto pistol-y,
auto pistol and maul. And weirdly, not a power maul, which is a bit disappointing. It just looks like a regular trench club from World War One. So that's what I've always wanted as like an aesthetic for years, like that kind of more kind of combat unit, because we've just never had it other than obviously the Death Riders. And yes, there's Bullgrins. I'm sure people are shouting at me from the comment section, but they were never available to Krieg back in the day. When the Forge World Imperial Armor books were about, you had an army list and it was very restrictive. You couldn't take Sentinels, you couldn't take Ogrins or Bullgrins. In fact, at one point, Bullgrins didn't even exist at that point. There was always a thing of the Krieg are very anti any form of mutation, and I think because of the radioactive fallout of their planet, they were very wary of that kind of thing in themselves, but also of other people that had it, such as your Ratlings, your Ogrins. So they just weren't ever allowed to team up together as part of the army. So yeah, they never really had access to that kind of combat unit in the same way that a regular guard player would.
I mean, it definitely seems like one of its cooler applications, though, to run it in that kind of melee function. I think that's really cool to see. And again, something that, had it just been, a new kind of unit that specialised in that specifically, would have been kind of cool, I guess. But yeah, to call it combat engineers and then to basically build some kind of weird homogenized version of the combat engineer and grenadier kit, it's very Yeah, it's very strange, is all you can really take away from it.
Here's the thing. They should have either gone, they're grenadiers. They look like grenadiers. They don't have shotguns. Just give them hotshot las guns, as they should do. And you've also got this cool combat variant of them with pistols and maces. Fantastic. 10 out of 10, no notes. Like, that's what they could have done. That would have been great. Yeah. They could have also done combat engineers that look like combat engineers. They've got the shotguns, and also they've got this kind of cool utility combat variant as well. Again, perfect. No complaints. Yeah. But instead, they've given us a bit of one, bit of the other. And in my mind, that makes no one happy. So it's like, just do one or the other. Or as you say, they could have called them something else. And mostly my bug is that they've called them combat engineers. They could have just called them, close assault troops. And then I would have had less of a problem again, because it's like they're not invalidating the combat engineers that we've had in the past. They're not invalidating the grenadiers that we've had in the past. And it's just a brand new unit. That would have also been fine. So it's this one's the most frustrating probably out of the whole range of models that they've given us.
Yeah, it's weird, right? It's like, I mean, they're supposed to use other ranges as an example. It's like saying, oh, this is a unit of striking scorpions, but they've got banshee bodies and fire dragon heads, and you're like, okay, sure, why not? Like, it's very odd in terms of the way that they've gone with it, although maybe not as extremely odd as the example that I've just offered. But next along, hopefully something that's a bit more kind of easy to get on with. We have a bunch of heavy weapons, or what are these called specifically? They're bigger than normal heavy weapons.
So there's the field ordnance batteries that were the Cadian ones. These aren't them. These are even bigger. I think they're called artillery batteries. The artillery team is describing it as.
There we go.
Which again is interesting. So this includes a heavy mortar, heavy quad launcher, which were 2 units from the Forge World range that we had for specific, mostly played by Krieg players, but again, anyone could run them. You also get, which is new, a multiple rocket launcher. Very cool. And a fearsome, it says siege cannon, which who quite knows what that means? I'm assuming that's more like just the basilisk variant.
It certainly looks basilisk-esque.
It looks like a basilisk. And so my criticism of this is I think there's one design aspect, but mostly my main point about this one is they've taken aspects of the quad launcher and the heavy mortar, which were sort of small field artillery pieces. It then, because they've included the siege cannon, makes me feel like they're trying to marry into the heavier artillery pieces that you had, which was the Earthshaker cannon and the Medusa siege cannon, which were these much larger artillery pieces. And they're sort of trying to all fit it onto one model. And it'll be interesting to see the size. They've said that the base is bigger than the current field ordnance batteries. So it's like, oh, do I have to rebase things now? Would these bases be equivalent to the Earthshaker carriages? I think that these bases would probably be too small for those, I think. You've got your original classic Forge World heavy mortar and quad launcher, which are probably far too small for these bases, and then your heavy artillery stuff, which is far too big for these bases. So again, it's like, you're not making anyone happy. You could have just done the smaller ones and it would have been fine. Although weirdly, they are very similar to the field ordnance teams that we've already got. You had very much like for like equivalents, like the Malleus Array is very much like the quad launcher in terms of rules. Like you could have easily just run it as those things. What's your take on these models?
I mean, I like them fine. I think, there's some really interesting variants in it. I really like the stubby mortar. I think that still kind of manages to get across some of the more kind of functional utility of Krieg and lean into some of its more kind of brutal kind of efficiency. I struggle a bit with this siege cannon just because it feels like, again, like to me, like, Krieg is always like a kind of interesting mixture of those kind of grim, dark archetypes mixed with just kind of, as I say, brutal efficiency. And when you look at a lot of the historical or older Forge World kits, Krieg stuff always had a certain kind of, it wasn't very sexy, right? They didn't deal in bevels.
No, it was more
or embellishments. You know?
Yeah, it was definitely more real world design aesthetics to them. They were a lot more brutal and had a lot of sort of World War One predominantly hints from the design cues. Some of these so this has obviously got a muzzle brake on the front, and it looks almost like a mini battle cannon in terms of the design of the muzzle brake. Things that I do like overall the front part of these artillery pieces look great, like in terms of like
I agree with that.
The shielding, and like the wheels, obviously iconic kind of Krieg style wheels, so I really like that. The back like pieces, which are the bits that you will pick up to move these by, have these little like stands that sort of go down into the ground, again reminiscent of the field ordnance batteries. Those I don't particularly like. They look very Cajun and maybe a bit too much World War II futuristic, more modern warfare stuff, and look very different from the old Forge World stuff. So those elements I don't like, and I would probably be clipping off and doing my own kind of little conversions on those to kind of Krieg them up a little bit more. But overall, in terms of the weapons, I think the barrel on that, what we assume is the siege cannon / basilisk, whatever it's going to be. It looks quite small and thin, so I'm not a huge fan of that one. The rocket launcher I think is very cool and interesting.
I like
that's probably my favourite because that's something new. It is again similar to the Malleus rocket launcher, but it looks really cool. It looks very it looks suitably Krieg. Is the best way to describe it. And again, it's like a new thing. Although weirdly, actually, looking at the guy carrying them, that looks very much like the shell that you got with the quad launcher originally. But obviously, it's like a little rocket now. And then you've got the classic quad launcher as well. The sandbags are just way too neatly lined up, and they look so artificial. They needed a bit more sort of haphazardness to them, and not so neatly stacked for them to work. I guess obviously you got to work with the limitations of plastic design and production, and that's probably why they look like that. But personally, I would scrap those and make my own or something if I had a choice.
I imagine you'd still be amazed how many bits go into making that. It wouldn't surprise me if every individual sandbag is its own piece that you have to stick together.
I mean, hopefully it's a front and back and you just sort of whack it together. If it's a bit more broken down, then that'd be awful. But who knows? Who knows? And they've done a bit more sort of more modern Krieg tech. Sorry, not even modern Krieg, modern guard tech to it. So when you look at the back of the shield, there's like some sort of screens and sort of sight stuff in there, which wouldn't have ever been on the originals. But I don't mind that too much.
Like they've incorporated a bit more, kind of Mechanicus style tech into it. The image of the actual rocket launcher has down here got a version without the sandbags, and I have to be honest, I think that would definitely be my preference, even though I'm sure it helps in terms of creating more of a kind of sense of size and space to have those sandbags kind of create like a frame around
Gives
it.
it more of a diorama feel to it, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But I really like the spotter. I really like the wide binoculars. I'm trying to think of a point of comparison there in terms of like a character from fiction with those kind of eyes that come out of the side. I think it was an old sci-fi police show that had characters.
Possibly, I'm pretty sure there's a Star Wars Cantina character. Definitely sort of like that kind of hammerhead shark sort of vibes. Yeah, so that is basically a replica of the old Forge World heavy artillery crew. So that again, like for like, perfect. Like can't complain when it's sort of based on the original and sort of is a bit more true to form. So he looks great. A lot of the crew look very cool. So overall, mostly happy with this. Yeah, the rear half of the carriage, yeah, there's some bits I don't particularly like. I'm glad there's no one like sat down on it like the field ordnance one, which was pretty awful. So again, I would convert them up to look more like this.
Yeah.
And yeah, the rocket one looks really cool. It'd be interesting to see what the rules are. But again, it's like, how much work will I have to put in to make my because I've got, I think, 2 of the quads and 2 of the heavy mortars to make them work. Do I have to rebase them? I hope not. I mean, I based mine on quite a small base and kept the crew separate. Which I quite liked. I can understand the sort of desire to do them on one big base and make a diorama out of them. So maybe I'll sort of potentially have to redo that. But I was using my quad launcher and my heavy mortar as the field ordnance battery. The Malleus launcher and the other one that wasn't the Basilisk. So I almost didn't need them to redo that one because it was still perfectly viable. But it'll be interesting to see what these are like in like rules wise and stuff.
If they only consulted with you, those scoundrels. But yeah, so I mean, on the whole, though, I'm pretty happy with those. I think they look pretty good.
Yeah.
We've already talked about the book. We've got some officers. So we have here Command Squad with Commissar. So yeah, I mean, the Commissar Mini to me is by far and away one of the better, if not the best, Commissar miniature they've released of late. The Commissar they did for the main Acadian release a couple of years ago was a huge disappointment. It lacked any of the kind of ornate absurdity of the Commissar. It was so much more of a kind of understated character, which to me is just completely the wrong vibe for a Commissar. I want my Commissar to wear a big, ridiculous hat and be, pasted in all of the kind of sigils and marks of their place of office. And I think this does all of that well. It just leans into the kind of aesthetic. It's very obviously identifiable. It's still, a design kind of aesthetic that is more in keeping with modern 40k design. So it's not quite as over the top or as absurd as some of the older Commissars, but it's certainly better than what they gave us, a couple of years ago with the Acadians. And I like the Power Fist. It's a very underrepresented weapon within the ranks of the Guard, and I always really love seeing it because I like the kind of more generic Power Fist design. The Plasma Pistol looks cool. The Scribe with the servo skull is really nice, and that whole section of this is. I can't fault it. I think that's a superb sculpt. And the base is really nice. Like, it's all just good stuff, I'd say.
Yeah, it is very strong. I do mostly like it. So, again, there's a thing that they describe it as a classic Command Squad. And it's like, a classic for who? It's not a classic Command Squad as a Guard player, because a Guard player would expect a Field Marshal in there. And instead, we've got a Commissar instead, and they obviously talked about it on the stream because it's due to casualty rates and you need the Commissar to restrain your Kriegsman maybe somewhat, which has always been the case. Like there's been 2, I believe, on foot Commissar models in the past in resin, which were both really cool models. This one is very good as well, although as I look closely, my one criticism, because again, this is like the weird design choice they made with their hoses, is where is that hose going on that Commissar? It's just being tucked into his jacket. It's like, what? Because obviously they're doing this whole, they've got to go down the front. It's like, where's it go? Well, just hide it in his jacket. It's going round the back, maybe. Whereas before, it would go either from the front and it would just have its own thing there, or it would go round the back to the top of his shoulders, which worked better. So that looks odd. He's hiding something under that jacket, but otherwise,
we haven't seen like a 360 view of it yet, though. So for all you know, there's a nice thing on his back.
There's like a hole in his coat where the hose is popping out. yeah,
That's how you have to deal with these things
I
sometimes.
know.
You know, you got to be resourceful.
It just seems silly. Yeah, the Powerfist is kind of cool. It's got the classic sort of visible pistons that a lot of the guard ones have. His pose on a not tactical rock but a tactical plank is cool. Again, with the use of barbed wire, which looks really good. The servo scribe ones are very cool.
Really cool. Love them.
The Voxcaster, very reminiscent to the old Forge World one, so I like that as a sort of nod in terms of he's holding the binoculars. That's what they had, but now he's got sort of bigger sort of earmuffs, which is odd because they're clearly like a separate thing, whereas the old ones...
He's obviously podcasting now.
I guess so, yeah. He's a trendy guy, whereas before it was like a little unit that would fit into and be like a part of the mask design that was actually literally an add-on that you had to, as an upgrade, you'd have to get and like, you know, add in. So yeah, they've gone from more like World War II style, almost like a sort of, it looks like a tank commandery type one. So he's all right though. He's good. Then they've got a sort of a junior commissar guy, again because they're not doing the standard sort of field marshals. He's got a bit more of a classic breastplate that's feels more reminiscent of the Cajun one that you were complaining about. I mean,
yeah, and again, by that extent, I really don't like that mini by comparison. I sort of, again, it's sort of, I understand like the idea that I don't even understand the idea. It's like a Commissar Junior. It's like what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of get it, and they've done that a few times. Like they've with the chaplains in Space Marines, they've given you
they've had junior chaplains.
Well, yeah, you've got the Judicia, right? He's part of the chaplain.
No, that's a different thing, isn't it? Or no, the Judicia is stupid. Don't talk about the Judicia.
But again, it's a sort of subcategory of chaplain, whereas this is again
dumb, is what it is. Okay. It's so dumb. The Judicia is dumb. This is dumb. The only ones I accept are like the baby apothecaries, you know, like where you get like the medic that's, you know, the Marine with a medipack.
Right, okay.
Sort of apothecary-esque, so like in the infiltrators or whatever.
Yeah.
Fine. If that's what you're going to do, fine. Although, again, does seem
and again, well, with this one, you see maybe where the other commissar's hose is going to. It's just a little thing down by his side. Just seems odd and a bit ugly, so I'm not a huge fan of that. The medical guy, I quite like.
I like. Yeah. Do you find it weird he hasn't got a hat on?
That's sort of what I like about it. He's sort of almost got like a medieval plague monk vibe to him because of the lack of hat, I think.
What do you feel about the blue hair, though?
Well, no, that's not hair, surely.
What else could it be if not blue hair?
Oh God! Oh. Yeah, do you know?
Why is it got blue hair?
I think you're right. Sorry, because it's the same colour as the coat, I just sort of thought it was part of the uniform. But looking closely, I think you're right. It is blue hair, and he's got like a bare head behind him. Okay, that is a bit odd. Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine the Krieg would invest. Yeah, you know. I mean, or they just have blue hair, Krieg, officially.
Maybe that's it. But I like his like little vials and his backpack and stuff. And again, so that's interesting. I guess the thing to say there is they used to have a quartermaster cadre, which was the equivalent of a medical unit. It was basically the guy going around as the quartermaster, collecting uniforms off of dead people, as well as sort of dispensing the Emperor's blessing by going around killing the injured that could not be saved. That was a very cool unit, but as part of that, they had like a couple of medical servitors. So to me, the idea of humans with medical kits never really felt very Krieg-like, and that was more of a distinction between Krieg versus other regiments. And obviously, the veteran guardsmen, you got your first medikit for Krieg, and then they've done it here. It's like they look cool. So I can't complain too much, even if it's sort of aesthetically a slightly different direction than what we had previously. And then we've got a sort of grenadier style specialist guy with a melter gun. And then,
which looks brilliant.
Yeah, he looks quite cool. He looks cool.
He looks really cool. Really cool. And the banner looks incredible as well. I really like the pose. I really like the overall kind of like vibe of it.
Yeah.
It's strong.
Okay, right.
It's a good looking banner. It's got bullet holes in it. Come on.
Oh, well, that is cool. The two things that I don't like about the banner. One, it's far too short. Like that pole, like it looks good waving behind him, but the banner pole should be at least another couple of heads higher. I think it just feels too short. And then the top icon on the banner just looks really stupid and naff. It just feels like they've copied that over from like, oh, what spare file in the library do we have? Can we put on here? And it feels like
they took it from their Adeptus Sororitas range. They were like, just slap that on it.
Yeah, and I don't know. This is a criticism that's very easy to wave in their direction because we know everything's CAD design nowadays, and it's easy to go, oh, it's just lazy and copied from somewhere, because it probably isn't. But that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like when you look at it. And that doesn't, just a simple eagle would have been fine, like the original models we've got. It just seems too top heavy. That basically is my main complaint. It's like it needs to be a lot smaller.
What, a flag? Top heavy? Never.
No, the thing that's on it is too top heavy. It should be small because it's sort of detracting from the flag itself. And the flag's so
just snip it off, mate. That's all I can tell you.
That is what I would do if I had this. I would encourage you to all snip it off and stick something else on there instead. So overall, mostly good. I would say, more good than not in this unit.
I think for me the Commissar is an absolute like 10 out of 10. The Servitors with the scribes,
they're very
10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Caster is cool. I like the additional detail, the headphones and other things. Pose is really nice. Baby Commissar is awful, unnecessary, terrible. The geezer with the vials is, he's fine. But I don't understand why they painted him with blue hair. And these two, the banner and just general vet, look really strong. So I think on the whole, it's a really, really good kit for the whole.
That's fair.
You just got to tolerate the weird Commissar, the baby Commissar.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we get because you had Field Marshal Venner was the named character that you had before. If he will come back in any form whatsoever, or if we just get a Field Marshal on foot, or if we're only now getting the sort of horse version, maybe. I would love, a foot version of a Field Marshal. So it's sort of odd that they've given us commissars and not a Field Marshal, and a commissar just isn't an extra model. So again, they're just taking it in a different direction, and that's for me to get too used to, I guess.
That's it, mate. That's it. All right, I think these are the last things.
Yeah.
We've got the heavy weapons teams, which, I'll say from the outset, I just really like. I think, at the end of the day, heavy weapon teams are always cool. These add in some interesting elements. They're different in some regards. I actually kind of liked the fact that before there was some uniqueness within the Krieg's heavy weapons teams. I appreciate you're probably going to talk about that, so I won't labour it. Because, again, like before, there was a bit of a difference in terms of like the design between, say, heavy stubbers and a heavy flamer, shall we say. I think that's it in terms of imagery. So, what's your vibe on these?
This is a blessing and a curse. So for years, I have been banging on the drum that the twin heavy stubbers that probably to this day, they were still selling. I don't know if they still do. They probably discontinued it in the last year, but for all of 9th and for a lot of 10th, the twin heavy stubber team was something they still sold, but they never gave it rules. And in fact, I think it was the one unit even in 8th. Again, it just never had rules. I might be wrong in that. Please feel free to correct me in the comments. But for 9th at least, it was a unit that you could buy legitimately, but there were literally no support for it. It wasn't in Legends. It wasn't in the main rules. It was just completely overlooked. And that was just really frustrating as a guard player and someone who owned these and wanted to build them. But there was no incentive to do so because there's no rules for it. So it's great to see them back. I think they look very similar to the original resin ones, which is, again, great. I think the only difference now is that there's like sort of one gunner on the base and that there's not enough room for a second guy, so they've done you like a sort of spotter as a secondary guy rather than using the big bases, which I actually quite like. And I said that when the Cadian heavy weapon teams came out, is the old heavy weapon, which I think were like on the Dreadnought style bases, were just too big for the models and just took up loads of space on your table. Whereas here, that you could actually have these up on ruins and it not be a problem, for example. So they look great. The lasgun again looks great, very similar. And then I love the fact that they've actually used like weathering powders, or maybe it looks like weathering powders. Maybe it's just on
the las cannon specifically.
On the wheels on the las cannon, yeah. And I don't know.
Yeah, really cool.
So that's either very like thinned down layers of paint and with a matte finish to look like powders, but it does look like powders, which is great, which is a nice nod to the old sort of art and stuff like that. So I like those. And you might be going, oh, but where's the heavy bolter that they used to have? Because they used to have heavy stubbers, las cannon, heavy bolter. And it's like, well, yes, it would have been nice if we had a heavy bolter here, maybe instead of a heavy flamer. But actually, you could just buy the Cajun kit and swap them out. It wouldn't be probably too problematic to actually kit bash these if you want the heavy weapon team in there. So I don't necessarily mind that. I'm just trying to think, though. I'm pretty sure maybe the Cajun ones also came with heavy bolters and las cannons. So it's odd that the las cannon is a duplicate between those ranges. But I can't actually remember exactly what you got in that Cadian heavy weapons team.
I'm just trying to find them now. Oh, here we are. Cadian heavy weapons team. So that's what you're looking at there. So yeah.
Oh, was it autocannon?
Las cannon, and heavy bolter.
Yeah, so autocannon was the other one you could also get for Krieg. So yeah, you could potentially use those. Interestingly, they obviously have got the two guys on the base, but they're on like little tripods, so it's a lot easier to fit them on, whereas the wheels take up a lot of space. So yeah, I guess the las cannon's the one sort of shared weapon. The flamer one is the one that I really dislike the most, and I think is just dumb. And that's me being kind. Like, I'm sorry to whoever designed this one. I just don't like it. So the original.
Why would you carry a heavy flamer around on like? Because this is the thing. Like, mounted weapons typically make sense when they are long range, like heavy weapons. Heavy flamers are obviously heavy, but you still would imagine that you would be moving around with them. You wouldn't be like going, "Oh, I'm going to sit here with my flamethrower."
Yeah, you could argue, it's a defensive thing for when people are running at you. Maybe what I find is odd that is like the ammo's on the guy's back. Like, again, if you're stationary, why would it be there? Why wouldn't it just be mounted on like the actual, piece itself? That just seems odd. But again, it's like, so what we had before was we had the Grenadiers squad had access to a heavy flamer team. It was two guys, one sort of holding the flamer, and the other guy, the hose went back to him, and he was carrying the flame like fuel canister on his back. And that made perfect sense because you're sort of walking forwards, you're like trying to clear out trench lines, you're sort of sharing the weight between you. Visually looked cool. It was like super iconic. Yeah, really cool. It was weirdly one of the few ways you could still buy Grenadiers. It was them and the heavy stubber team and the melter gun were the two kind of only kits that you could buy when the Grenadier squad was not available for years on Forge World. So that was really iconic. But it was part of a larger team, basically. Whereas now they've sort of taken that concept and ported it over to the heavy weapons team. Doesn't feel like it quite works as well, because it's like, yeah, you've taken the concept of a heavy flamer team, which existed, but you've put it in a way that doesn't feel very accurate or realistic. Like you said, maybe for defensive stuff, but you wouldn't walk forwards with this. Like, so the old Forge World teams, there was one variant that was the team running. So what they would be doing is there'd be the arms or the little legs behind the tripod that they would grab and they would run. So the gun is pointing backwards as they're running forwards to reposition it. So obviously you're not firing at that point. You're just running around with it. But that's how it operated. And it was great that they had that kind of very thematic, almost diorama. But never really worked from a sort of gaming piece because it didn't look like it was firing. But it looked good for a different reason. So I can see why they've not done that here. But it just... yeah, it feels like the flame is the miss out of all of these. It doesn't really feel like it works or fits in with the other pieces. So being positive, I want to be positive about it. What it does mean is if I had 3 of the heavy flamer squads from the Grenadier team, I've definitely got 1. I might have another one in a blister somewhere because I might have bought a few more. So potentially I could do like a flamer team and just, use those models rather than these ones, and make it viable, in that way.
Well, that would be cool. That'd be really cool. Overall, bar the heavy flamer, I like this kit. I think it's cool. I like the geezer on the telephone next to them. I think that's really cool as well. I assert that if you're taking them in units of 3, as in 3 miniatures, that there is 1 geezer on the telephone for 3 things, rather than each one of them has their own telephone man.
Interesting. Well, in theory, there should be 1 per model because there's meant to be a sort of a loader and a gunner. And obviously that's how the Cadian one's done.
Yeah, but he doesn't look like he's loading, does it? It looks like he's on the blower.
Yeah, true. But then, because, rules-wise, these always had 2 wounds to represent the fact that there was, 2 crew. But now if there's only 1 crew, is it still getting 2 wounds? But then, the rules are so divorced from the sort of those kind of logic reasonings now, it probably doesn't matter. It's just got 2 wounds because it says it's got 2 wounds.
It does.
And that's it. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there's I think there's 1 guy per unit, that would look better, but in my mind it feels like there should be 2 guys per gun.
I agree. I think it's weird, especially as seen here. They've established it really well with the Cadian ones that they had to,
squish them on.
Go in it. Yeah, it's a very odd decision. But
in a way, taking that model off frees it up and actually looks so much better on the Krieg ones, because they just look a bit too cramped on the Cadian ones. So if they had,
it's true.
They had done something similar here, it would look better for them.
Because it appears a bit more armoured, a bit more bulky as a weapon emplacement, you can kind of assert a 2-word profile onto it because of that. Because you look at it and go, sort of looks like 2 wounds, chunky. Yeah. Cool. Well, look, I mean, that's Krieg in terms of the entirety of the reveal. I'll just say my closing statement on it and then allow you, Phil, to wrap it up, because I think yours will be far more profound. But on the whole, I actually really like it. I think it's really good that we're seeing such an expanse in the Guard range, and I think it's really positive for the army. I think, Guard have always been this sort of strange army in 40k, in so much as their support kind of started out very early on in 2nd edition and even earlier as quite expansive. They had lots of range variety. They had lots of really fun, interesting things you could do with it. But in a way, there's kind of been a legacy to Guard that's just never really been sort of fulfilled since as far back as even 3rd or 4th edition, when they put out the kind of Cadian and Catachan range. And essentially over the years, we've just had this continuing kind of amalgamation of everything, and we ended up in a place certainly around kind of 7th, 8th edition through till, now almost, where it had just become Codex Cadia. It had just become quite linear. And although obviously there were Forge World things and things they'd done with it to try and kind of expand it, it all felt very specialized and very, kind of elusive in terms of the fact it wasn't kind of mainstream. So what I love about this is I think it's a really good representation of where Games Workshop see the Guard and what they're willing to do with it. And I think this is a really expansive and good release that will hopefully, beckon in lots of new Guard players and create new Krieg fans. And even if that isn't, the Krieg that you remember from the Forge World books of old, it is still, a great kind of, evolution, I suppose, in some regards. So I think overall, for me, as less of a hardcore Krieg fan, but as someone who spends a lot of time talking to one, I am broadly in favour of this, but I can understand and do still feel like it's kind of like a Primaris Krieg project. It is Krieg, but it isn't, and that's kind of fine. But yeah, I think the overall gains outweigh the potential loss on this one. I'm very happy with it as a range. I think it looks really cool. Yeah, I won't be collecting it myself, but I think it looks really great, is my vibe on it.
Yeah, no, that's fair, I think. And, overall, I think this is a real positive. As you say, it's great that we're seeing an expansion of Guard into, not being the sort of monolith of Cadians with a smattering of a few other things. It's, Cadians. It's, I guess there's Attillans in there as well, but it's definitely the Krieg. Potentially, like I said, I'd love it if we see this happen again in another year or two's time, with, Kachan or, Talan. And eventually maybe we get to a stage where there's some really cool, fleshed out regiments. Whether there be another wave 2 of Krieg, I'm really suspicious. And I'm sort of a bit doubtful that they will be, because this actually feels like the second wave of the Cajun release, and that if they're doing more, they just go on to another regiment. I would at least hope we maybe get another couple of characters thrown into the mix, that maybe we get an upgrade pack at some point for like tank commanders and stuff like that. That would be great, or an easy way to maybe convert some of those other like heavy weapon teams or like Sentinels or what have you to Kriegify them up a little bit more. That would be really great. There's still so much more that is missing that they could still add in. You've got Hades drills for Cyclopses, someone like Venner or a Field Marshal would be great. There was the Quartermaster squad. That would be great. There were things like, the Rapier Laser Destroyer was often very like quintessentially Krieg as well, it felt like, or at least to me. So, there's lots from Forge World that they could port over still to them. They could still do Grenadiers and Combat Engineers properly as other units in terms of like a visual look or utility pieces. So there's a lot more scope that they could do with them if they decide that they want to. But overall, I'm really happy, despite like all my negative Nancy criticisms of some of the models and the design choices. It feels a bit disrespectful to the history and the lore and the sort of the iconic look of the Death Corps, and that they've made some changes that I just don't like, but then that's me, and that they're doing their own thing. If you're a new player, you're not as wedded to that old design look. If you're someone that just prefers building in plastic than resin, you'll really love this. It's a bit more affordable than the old Forge World stuff, although ironically not much more, because I looked at the prices as before. I've got the old 2018 catalogue, and they were like $44 or £44, and they're now £40 or something. It's like, or no, yeah, the price hasn't gone up that much, although taking into account inflation, yes, they were more expensive back then. I think they're the equivalent of like £50 now. So it's like they were expensive, but it's like they're still actually quite expensive for what they are in plastic. They're not the huge saving that you probably thought you would have been getting if they were in plastic, say 10 years ago, for example, because the price of plastic stuff is just
all right,
gone
maybe
up.
If you buy the. You're doing all right if you buy the
box
set.
Oh yeah, the box set will give you a good saving for sure.
That'll probably be about 120 quid as it usually is, which probably will be reasonable.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I think overall it's really good. I think I'm really excited to see what the rules will be, and then it's like how much of an effort will it be to maintain my current army to be kind of playable, I guess, in terms of what still will work, what's WYSIWYG, what's not WYSIWYG, what should I technically rebase, what could I maybe get away with not having to rebase. I'm just excited to see some of the rules for some of the new units as well, so that would be cool. And what kind of detachments are we getting the codex, and that's not necessarily like a Krieg specific thing, but it's getting me excited for Guard in general in 10th edition. Nice. So overall it's really good, despite some misgivings about some of the bits.
Mate, look, at the end of the day, it's an exciting time for Guard, and ultimately, I think it's cool to see. And you just got to basically, as I said before, break out your cornflakes packets, just build yourself some nice little circles, and just do it that way, mate. Why worry? I mean, it's not like you spent ages building and painting these things. Why bother rebasing them properly? They're only change them again tomorrow.
Well, yeah, that is a potential thing. I mean, overall, what is good about this thing is it is a sign that Krieg is being supported in a way that it hasn't been up until now, and they are, forever going to be in the rules. And they're not being just relegated to legends and being discontinued, and you're not getting maybe just that one veteran guardsman squad. It's like the range but it could potentially grow to more than what we've got here. But even what we've got now is enough to keep me going with just swapping out some bits here and there. So that's good. I think that's a great sign.
Exactly. Pour one out for the Elysians.
Maybe right. Soon. Maybe they'll come back one day.
Indeed, maybe just. Although they had a perfect opportunity with that new Scion release that they just didn't do. And all right, well, there you go. We're going to move on now to the next thing. Transitional noise. Wow.